Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm here to talk to you about meditation and mindfulness. I think I have two sessions with you. I've got this short talk now and then a class this evening. I think they called it master class, which is a bit over the top because I'm not a master. I've certainly got a lot more to learn, but I can certainly help you to get started in how to learn to meditate, to practice. These days we call it mindfulness. I think that's a good word because people are aware now that you don't have to be a Buddhist or a religious person to meditate. It can be a technique that you use in your daily life. As you heard in the introduction, I do quite a lot of work in the corporate world, also in schools and universities and hospitals, prisons, drug rehab centers. I work in quite a few different organizations teaching people how to meditate and particularly how to bring that into their working day. Because I think traditionally the image of meditation is something a bit removed from ordinary reality. But I try and teach people how to do 5 seconds of awareness training behind their desk or while they're traveling on the tube in London. So how to build it into your daily experience. So I was asked to talk about meditation or mindfulness and how it builds resilience. The word resilience is very popular these days. When I hear the word resilience, what do I think? Well, I think it's more than just learning to put up with something. I think it's very much about transforming our attitude to stress, transforming our reaction to stress. I don't like the word stress management. I think that's very weak, like managing just so it's easier, I think transforming our entire reality around stress is a very important thing. How does meditation help with this? I want to talk about this in terms of the mental experience of stress and also the physical experience of stress. I think we'd all agree that stress is very much a state of mind. And of course, the first thing one does when one tries to help somebody address their stress is you usually get them to write down on a piece of paper all the things that are making them stressed. You say, write down the top 5 things that make you stressed. They end up writing about 50 things. My husband, my wife, my job, my colleagues, my boss, my clients, etc. And then you say, look at that list more closely. Ask yourself, is it those things that cause you stress, or is it your thoughts about those things? Is it your reaction to those things? Because once you understand that, then you understand the possibility of change. So in terms of how meditation helps our mind to deal with stress, well, it's very much about learning to let go of the negative thoughts, the stressful thoughts, the mental pressure, the anxiety, the fear. But this brings me to a really important point because there's such a big misconception in our culture about meditation, which is that people think meditation means you clear your mind. A lot of people think that, and then they can't do it. So I meet lots of people who say, I've tried meditation, but I couldn't do it. I failed. I say, what do you mean you failed? Tell me more. And they say, well, I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't get rid of my thoughts. I couldn't empty my head. Now, this is all based on a huge misconception that people think meditation is about blanking or clearing the mind. That is not meditation. That is putting yourself into a coma. It is, and it's maybe sometimes we're suffering so much that the idea of just being able to switch off might be quite attractive, but then you've got to regain consciousness again, and you're back. It's not about banging our head against a wall until we fall unconscious, just to kind of blank out. That's not meditation. So it's not about getting rid of the thoughts, but it's about choosing the thoughts. It's about having more mental freedom so that we can be less tormented by our thoughts, be less bothered by our thoughts, more able to let go of the thoughts that don't help us, more able to choose the thoughts that can help us, more able to choose happiness. If we start to define happiness as a choice rather than a result, that will change our lives. You see, for many people, happiness is a result. Happy when, happy because, happy if. You know what I mean? It's a result of experiences. Change it round. Happiness is the cause of your experiences. Because if you choose happiness as a state of being, an internal state, then you are causing reality to appear differently. So you're choosing your experiences. So meditation is about training the mind, and training is the operative word here. We've heard already in a few presentations the importance of training. It's not just, go to a 5-minute class and it's all done. And we do live in a society that's a bit impatient. We want instant everything. So meditation is not instant, but it's training. And just like we train our body, we could also train our mind. So in terms of the mental effects of stress, or the mental experience of stress, what we're doing through meditation is learning to have less mental pressure. But I also want to talk about the physical side of this, because it's interesting to look at what happens with meditation and the physicality of stress. What is the physicality of stress? How does it feel in our body? We all know how that feels. We know when our shoulders are tired, our body aches. We've been sitting behind a desk all day, but we feel like we've been running up a mountain. That's a bit strange. Our body hasn't done anything. In fact, many people don't even get up from their seat. They wheel their chair across the office to the coffee machine and back again. So there's not much physical movement, but the body feels completely exhausted. So what is that? So why are we tired? Why are we exhausted? Why is our body stressed? It's because our body is full of stress hormones, chemicals, and this is exhausting. The main one being cortisol. You've all heard of cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone that's released when we're under pressure. It's actually highly toxic. It's not good for us. It causes all kinds of illnesses. It causes us to be tired. It causes us to age faster. It causes genetic damage. It's incredibly toxic, and our body is generally running that chemical a lot of the day because we're under pressure, and it's making us unwell. You might ask, why does the body have a toxic chemical running through it? Is that some kind of glitch in evolution, or whatever one believes in? Is it a mistake? It's not a mistake, because how we were designed, or how we designed through evolution, however you want to see that, we are wired for survival. So traditionally we would be hunter-gatherers, or we were out in the wilds in very dangerous situations, and the part of our brain which deals with stress is called the amygdala. The amygdala responds to stress by causing the reaction that leads to the release of cortisol. The cortisol puts us into that fight or flight reaction. So we're out there in the wilderness, we're hunter-gatherers, we are in danger, there's a predator coming to get us, we go into fight or flight mode, the cortisol is released, and then we burn it off, because we either fight or flee. We either punch the enemy in the nose or we run away. So then that's a healthy reaction, the levels return to normal. But fast forward now to the 21st century, we're no longer living in the wilderness, we're sitting in glass boxes, in offices. We're still doing the same thing. We're behind our desk, we're under pressure. The amygdala doesn't really know whether we're being chased by a lion or being chased by an email. It doesn't know the difference, it just knows pressure. The pressure causes the cortisol to be released, and then we sit there behind our desk experiencing a steady trickle of cortisol throughout the day, and it's making us very tired. It makes us reach for the cup of coffee and the Mars bar because we throw in some more chemicals. It doesn't work. We get more tired. So this kind of cortisol cycle that we're all trapped in is something that's very debilitating, something that's very exhausting. That is the physicality of stress. Now, of course, exercise really helps. Exercise is crucial, it really does help, but also meditation, because you can't run all day, but you can certainly do moments of meditation many, many times a day. So with meditation, or mindfulness, whatever we wish to call it, what are you doing? What you're doing is you're engaging different parts of your brain. So you're disengaging the amygdala, and you're engaging the parts of your brain that relate to being present, being aware, and being happy. You're putting yourself into a different gear. So the brain causes the release of different chemicals, well-being chemicals. You don't have to take my word for this. This has all been researched. You can look up all the research, especially in Harvard, around the chemistry of meditation, how it reduces cortisol and increases a much more interesting chemical called oxytocin. Have you heard of oxytocin? It's kind of the feel-good chemical. The first time in our life that we were introduced to oxytocin was when we were babies. When we're born, when we leave the mother's womb, when the fetus or the baby moves from a water environment into an air environment, it's dangerous. So the body produces a gigantic spike in cortisol. As soon as we're born, a huge spike in cortisol. Then in the ideal situation, the baby is put on the mother's body, skin-to-skin contact. That immediately produces oxytocin in the mother and the baby. And this is further enhanced by breastfeeding. Through the breastfeeding, the baby is filled with oxytocin, the mother as well. So in that process, the mother is priming us for resilience. She is showing us how to move from a cortisol spike to a state of oxytocin. She's training us. And that's a very natural human function that we kind of have lost sight of, possibly because many of us were weaned too early, but we've kind of lost sight of that healthy resilience. Now, the good news is that meditation can bring that back, because through meditation practice, you are enhancing the oxytocin in your body, and you're reducing the excessive flow of cortisol. Your amygdala doesn't switch off, it doesn't lose its power. We do need it when the fire alarm goes off or if we're in danger, but it's going to become less reactive. So this kind of evidence is very interesting. Of course, in Buddhism, we've known for centuries that meditation works, but now that it's been proved by science, it's got a new lease of life, because science is the new God, let's face it. So that's great. The evidence out there has made it a very compelling case where people are switching on to this and realizing, well, it's as important as nutrition and exercise. It's mental nutrition. And you can read the evidence, and it makes it very clear that if you do a bit of meditation each day, you are basically reprogramming your body chemistry, your brain and body chemistry. And this is something you can do for yourself. Of course, you go to a class to learn it, but ultimately you're doing this for yourself. And you're doing this throughout the day. Because the crucial thing about meditation is you can do it anywhere. You don't have to be sitting in a cave or in a monastery or dressed like this. It's not a religious thing at all. People often think, oh, it's all about Buddhism. Buddhism, when you meditate, you're watching your breathing. Buddhists don't own the breath, okay? So anyone can watch their breathing. It's got nothing to do with religion at all. But watching the breathing means being aware of your breath. And I'm going to show you this evening, those of you who want to come, how to do that in the most effective way. But the other important thing is to have these tiny micro moments of mindfulness throughout your day. I do this when I'm traveling. I travel a huge amount. I'm usually on an aeroplane 3 times a week because I teach all over the world. So a lot of traveling, a lot of standing in queues. What do you do when you're standing in a queue? We go into fight or flight mode. We do. Our body goes into a cortisol reaction. We start feeling impatient. When am I going to get to the front of the queue? What a way to live, that we're always living for getting to the front of the queue. Why not just be there in that moment? So I do that. I'm standing in a queue, or my favorite one is being in rush hour in London on the tube. It's a kind of stressful situation. You're packed like sardines in a hot metro, in a hot subway carriage, and we're all stressed. But then you don't have to be if you just practice a moment of mindfulness, which means you take yourself out of your thoughts and into your body. You feel the ground under your feet. You're aware of your shoulders. You're aware of your breathing. What you're doing is you're changing the brain focus from stress into just focusing on one of your senses, the sense of touch, the sense of sound, hearing, the sense of visual, whatever it is, and it puts you into that mindful state. You're switching gear. If you build this up throughout the day, you could do it 50 or 60 times a day. Even in a busy office, most of the people I teach live in busy office situations. I work in busy situations myself. You probably think a monk doesn't know what stress is, but I do. I don't float around on a cloud. I'm very much in the world of work and travel and appointments and phone ringing all the time. And I know how these techniques can really help me with that, because it just refocuses you. It's like recharging your mental batteries throughout the day. And if you do this in small doses, many, many times a day, it starts to build up in your mind and your body, and it starts to change you into a more calm and relaxed person. But let me tell you an interesting story about this. I was teaching mindfulness in the corporate world 22 years ago. That's when I started teaching. And that was before it became popular. I mean, now it's so trendy that it's sort of everywhere. You know, companies are almost embarrassed if they're not offering mindfulness to their staff. But when I started 22 years ago, there wasn't a language for it. I had to really explain to people what it meant, and there were a lot of misconceptions. And I went to a company in London to teach meditation to their staff. The boss had asked me to come in, so he was open to it, but he had some doubts. And so before the class, he took me aside and he said, what are you going to do to them? And I explained a bit about the techniques I'd be showing. And he said, well, just don't make them too relaxed. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I don't want them to become useless. So, of course, there needs to be a discussion with this guy about why he's talking about his staff as if they're just objects, but that's another discussion to be had. But the main point, which I found really interesting, is that he had equated relaxation with a loss of efficiency. He thought his image of meditation was that you become very spaced out, kind of really chilled out, kind of like hippies or monks, or people who are a bit sort of, you know what I mean, a bit too laid back and can't get anything done. Well, that's not how it works, because I would say that if you meditate, it makes you relaxed in a way that you don't become wound up so easily. You can stay calm, you can get less nervous, you can be more present, more focused. I do a lot of teaching in schools and universities, and we don't really talk about stress. Of course, there is stress, but the main thing we talk about is mental focus. I'm trying to get a few schools to start each lesson with 2 minutes of mindfulness to get the kids focused before the class starts. Because if you go to a class and you're all distracted, you're not present, then you don't hear anything. So if you think about this in terms of relaxation combined with strong mental awareness and focus, you have a very efficient mind. You're able to work with great effectiveness in terms of your work and also in terms of your relationships. Happiness only exists in the present moment. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. It's in the present moment. Even if the present moment is an uncomfortable present moment. I keep telling people, be present, and then of course they say, well, what if I don't want to be present? What if I'm sick? What if I'm in pain? Don't tell me to be present. Well, I would say even with pain, sickness, and struggle, if you can truly be present with compassion and acceptance, you've changed that reality. Being present is something people pay thousands of pounds for because they go on holidays. People spend thousands of pounds to go and lie on beach resorts in Thailand or wherever to be in the present moment. And then they check their phone to see what's happening at home, so they're not in the present moment. I would say you could, if you think about somebody who's lying on a beach in that present moment, having a great holiday, and you ask them, what are you actually feeling? They would say, well, I feel relaxed, my body is relaxed, my mind is relaxed, I don't have any worries. Well, you can experience that right now, here, in this room. You don't have to lie on a beach to experience that, because it's a state of mind. So to be present is something you can achieve anywhere. Anywhere. You don't have to be in some nice environment. Sure, go on holiday, but you can't be on holiday all the time. You can't lie on that beach all the time, but you can certainly have that experience all the time, or at least in moments throughout your day. So this is the whole point of mindfulness, is to be calm, to not be stressed out, but also to be present and to be aware. And this brings happiness and also a greater sense of connection to others. There's a huge movement of mindfulness these days, a huge interest in it, but it tends to sometimes be just boiled down to a stress management technique. I think it's bigger than that. And you don't have to think about Buddhism or religion, but I think it's bigger than just stress management. I think it's about compassion. I think it's about learning to love yourself and love others, learning to open your heart, not just your brain. When you practice mindfulness in that way, it can become enormously rewarding. Otherwise, it's just another thing on the list to try and feel better. So I think there has to be some kind of talk about compassion within the mindfulness training, and then it becomes truly beneficial. So my time's up, so this was just a short sort of taster of what the benefits of meditation are, and if any of you want to come to the class later, we're going to look in more depth at how to practice it. I want you to go home with 3 or 4 techniques under your belt. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.